and welcome to the Flourishing Center Podcast. I'm Amelia Zhivatovskaya, your host and founder of the Flourishing Center. We are training the change agents of the world and equipping them with research-based tools for healthy, happy, and successful living, and we're so grateful that you're here. Each episode features 3 sections. First is the Science Says section, where we summarize a recent research study and show you how to put the science into action. Next, we give you a research-based life hack with simple strategies for incorporating positive psychology into your life for greater well-being. And then our Practitioner Corner is where we interview someone who's out there living, breathing, and spreading positive psychology in their own unique way. Learn about how they're growing their personal and professional work and get inspired with strategies for how you might use positive psychology in your own life. Thanks for listening, and let's dive in. Hello. So happy to be here with you. And good news is that today we're talking about good news. In particular, how we can all enhance the quality of our relationships by simply capitalizing on the good news of other people. We'll talk about that for our Science Says and our Life Hack section. And then in our Practitioner Corner, I'm so excited to introduce you to Dimple Mukherjee. This powerful change agent is helping people tell their story through her courage, through her passion. I can't wait to share her with you. Let's get started. Today's Science Says is an article titled Making the Good Even Better, a review and theoretical model of interpersonal capitalization, recently published in the Journal of Social and Personality Psychology. The authors write that when good things happen, individuals will often retell the good news to others. They call this process capitalization. And they separate out the capitalizer, who's the person that's sharing the good news, from the responder, who's the person who's receiving the good news. For a long time, we know that there's benefits to the capitalizer or the sharer in being able to share good news with the other person. However, the newer research also supports that there's a lot of benefits to be had for the responder or the receiver of good news. I love this type of research because simple interventions like this are always available to us, and the fact that we can enhance the quality of our own life and the quality of the lives of the people around us simply by doing something like asking them to share good news is so exciting to me. The authors write that people want to communicate their good fortune and positive experiences to others, this process that they call capitalization, and it's been identified by many researchers. In particular, researchers such as Shelley Gable have explored how do people respond when a person shares good news. We know that when a person shares bad news, we're typically pretty empathetic. We tend to ask questions, and we intuitively, especially with people that we care about, if something bad happens, we are compassionate, we are supportive. Dr. Shelley Gable and her colleagues have also explored how do people respond to good news. A specific type of response called active constructive responding is a way that responders tend to be showing enthusiastic support to the person who's sharing the good news. So in the past, they've researched how the sharer is going to be impacted by the responder's response. Here, we're also looking at this dynamic interplay between people. The researchers refer to capitalization as a dynamic interpersonal process, and they talk about how it's contagious, that there's benefit to the individual that's being told the good news as much as it is to the person who's actually sharing the good news, and that it can also promote future capitalization attempts, responses, and therefore long-term relationship well-being. They look at the social skill and the social process involved in capitalization. I like to think of it as social glue, that every single time that we have these interpersonal interactions that go well, it helps connect that social glue, build a few more fibers between yourself and the person you're connecting with. Every single time you have a slightly negative interaction, it separates that glue. It pushes you from one another. And I love how the authors take a look at the mechanisms behind what is capitalization and how does it work. So again, capitalization is an interpersonal process wherein capitalizers retell their personal good news to responders. The authors describe that capitalizers may reap additional benefits over and above the original value of the positive event when they retell their story, when they share it with somebody else. And more importantly, the capitalizer's perception of how their respondent or how the receiver responds is actually critical to determining the interpersonal and intrapersonal outcomes of that event. And the authors write that mundane, everyday events may be just as influential as life-altering events because it's the interpersonal nature of capitalization, or the act of sharing and responding of the partner, that is key to reaping the benefits of this process. They say that when people discuss positive events with others, consciously or unconsciously, their goal is to sustain, prolong, and augment the positive emotions that they feel from the event, and also, consciously or unconsciously, to strengthen their relationships with the responder. The researchers also describe something called the sociometer theory. They say that self-esteem is an internal gauge of the extent to which people perceive themselves as having value as a relational partner, somebody who's interacting with other people. And therefore, it can help them satisfy their belonging needs. So they suspect that, again, consciously or unconsciously, one of the reasons that we share good news is that we have this internal dial of the capacity that we hold to make an impact in our world, and that when we share good news with other people, we kind of boost up that meter inside of our body, inside of our brain, that says, hey, I bring good things to the world, and I'm able to share this with one another. They say that retelling one's good news to others, especially significant others, is just one way to boost the sociometer, because the good news being relayed indicates one's value, and because the process of sharing signifies to a partner that one values that relationship. They say that capitalizing may facilitate the fundamental goal of creating and maintaining cooperative alliances, and therefore increasing one's perception of their social value. I think that's so interesting, because that belonging need, that need to feel that we matter, is so fundamental to what it means to be human. And as we refill our sociometers, we successfully capitalize on those interactions and we produce positive emotions. Such a simple intervention, asking people what's good and helping them capitalize on that. In fact, researchers have also been looking at interventions for how to teach people how to be better capitalizers, which we'll talk about in our life hack section. Thanks for listening, and let's move on to the next section. In our Science Says section, we talked about the importance of capitalizing on good news. In particular, the fact that when a person shares something that's good with a significant other, a friend, a person that's in their life, that not only do they reap the benefits of savoring the good news that they're sharing, but that the respondent also capitalizes on the good news, because they get the added positive emotions and the sense of connection, the sense that this person is wanting to connect with me. And it creates a sort of social glue between us. As I mentioned, researchers have also started to test interventions. How can we get people capitalizing even more? And the intervention for getting people to do this is simply teaching them about the benefits of capitalizing and sharing good news. And in particular, teaching people how to respond to good news, how to teach them to respond enthusiastically, how to teach them to respond in a way that generates even more information out of the person, and essentially teaching them how to help other people savor. Now, I know what you might be thinking. A person shares good news with me, and I react enthusiastically. That's simple. Doesn't everybody do that? Do we really need to be taught how to get excited for or connected to a person when they share good news? And the answer is, sadly, some of us do. And that's because research has actually identified 4 different ways that people tend to respond to good and bad news. And what we find is that that enthusiastic, caring, committed, curious, connected response is one that many of us naturally do when it comes to bad news, but we don't always do it with good news, meaning people sometimes can be a little dismissive unknowingly when a person shares good news. Sometimes people hijack that good news, meaning, for example, a person will share something good that they just experienced and the receiver will tell them about something positive that happened to them. We call this the joy hijackers. These are the people who take the positive emotion that you would be getting from that event and they actually take it to themselves, putting the intention onto them. It's all about me. Some people, when you share good news, automatically go to the negative side of what that might mean. They might go, that's great, but you got a promotion? That's great, but you're already traveling so much. Or, wow, you got accepted to that study abroad program. That's great, but how are you going to pay for that? And what the research shows is that supportive, enthusiastic responding to positive news is actually a stronger predictor of the happiness and the quality of that relationship. And that doesn't mean that if you don't notice that maybe there's a potential pitfall to the person's positive news, that you don't eventually share it. But the key is, how do people respond initially? And researchers such as Connolly Vasquez-Bello, Ormindy, and Jeske in 2015 and others have been testing interventions where in just as little as a 30-minute training session teaching people how to recognize positive messages from their partners and from their friends, and then inviting those individuals to celebrate other people's good news at least once a day for a week, compared to people who were told to refrain from celebrating, had significant increases to their happiness and to their well-being, reinforcing this model that the process of sharing good news, of asking people to share good news, of capitalizing on those wins is a very simple way that we can build our positive emotions and decrease our negative emotions. So my encouragement to you, particularly as this newer research on the respondent's well-being is coming out, is ask people to share what's good. Ask them, what are they savoring? What are they celebrating? What's happening that they're proud of? So often we live in a culture where people are afraid that if they share something good, something that they're proud of, that they're going to be accused of bragging. But instead, we know that it's not bragging. It is the connection, the fiber, the glue that gets created between people interpersonally when we are sharing good news. So give people the permission to savor and get excited, feel what they're feeling. Also, we know that when we are stuck in a me-centered reality, when we're focused on just ourselves and how we feel and what's working and not working within our own life, we can get a little tripped up on our happiness level. When something good happens, we feel good, and when something bad happens, we feel bad. But when we are more connected to others around us, when we're able to really think about other people's life experiences and also get curious about what's going on in their life, and wanting to be of value, wanting to be of service, wanting to help them capitalize on their wins, as well as being supportive to them during their challenges, we remember that we are social creatures, that we fit into this puzzle piece of connection to the world around us. We feel happier. We remember that we belong. We remember that we matter. So I encourage you to start practicing today. Ask someone that you care about, what are you celebrating? What are you proud of? What's something that's making you happy today? And use these simple interventions to boost the well-being of yourself and those around you. Hello everyone, with me today I have Dimple Mukherjee joining us from Toronto, Canada. She is an occupational therapist and women's coach. She is doing such beautiful work in this world and has an amazing story to tell, and I can't wait to share her with you. Something you might not know about Dimple is that she grew up in Taiwan and she spent the first 12 years of her life there and actually used to know how to speak fluent Mandarin. Now she says she can still hold her own, even though she's lost quite a bit of it. And Dimple, we're so excited to have you here. Thank you so much for making this time.
Thank you, Amelia, for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh, thank you. I know that you have had a bit of a wild life for such a young life. You've been to so many parts of the world. You've experienced so much life. You've given life to your boys. Tell us what brought you to this work.
So I think, Amelia, like many others who, some of us stumble upon spiritual development and growth. And for me, it was really through, I believe, my experiences as a kid and growing up in different countries and being exposed to different cultures that gave me a really rich childhood. And I thank my parents for that. But it also brought with it a certain level of innocence and naiveness that was built into my life because I lived in a traditional Indian home. So because of that, I was lucky enough to be protected and sheltered, but at the same time, not so lucky because I didn't develop any of those skills that I needed as a teenager to really understand and make those proper choices. So it wasn't until I went through my own personal challenges in my marriage and then my marriage fell apart was when I started seeking out ways of comforting myself and ways to build a better life. And that's how I came across all of this growth leading programs and, eventually to Good Life Project, eventually to you, and then eventually to positive psychology.
That's beautiful. And you work with people as an occupational therapist and you integrate positive psychology into your work with women. Tell us more about that.
So it's really interesting. I always go back to those times when you were teaching us the classes, when we were doing the program, where you talked about the illness to wellness continuum. So for me, as an occupational therapist, I've been doing that all my vocational life. I've been in the field since I was 22, and it is super rewarding in the sense that I'm working with people who have disabilities, and some of them some major ones, and a pattern started emerging where I was looking at these individuals and I'd see individuals with chronic pain, and then I'd see individuals with spinal cord injuries, like people who are quadriplegic after having been in car accidents. And I looked at them and there was a common thread. They all had a common thread of resilience and grit. And I didn't know that's what it was called at the time when I started working at that young age in OT. And then what happened after I did my positive psychology course, I started to reflect and noticed all these character traits that my clients were possessing. And I thought that was just really a beautiful way for them to live their life despite their challenges. And I wanted to take that model and turn it into helping women to develop these same character traits, but from a wellness angle. So from an illness to a wellness, because one of my biggest passions in life is to help others develop preventative care practices. And I think self-care and creating connections is part of that practice.
That's beautiful. I know that while we are in a place where you and I both we get the value of self-care and we know how preventative is important. I know that you've also spent a lot of your work enabling women to trust that they could actually learn to self-care for themselves, right? Can you speak more about some of the obstacles you found in helping people actually embrace this type of mentality? Because I think so often our culture has this no pain, no gain, and people get rewarded for being able to get by without needing to self-care.
So yeah, that it's very true what you just said. It's really, I'm finding that sometimes people have to hit rock bottom to really appreciate the value of healthcare, of preventative care, and that's the step. While I don't want to rob them of their experiences, their emotions, that's the preventative element. It's like, how do I help you recognize the value of self-care without having to hit rock bottom or compromising any part of your life? And what I do is, apart from my one-on-one coaching, is I talk a lot about the two pillars of my business in women's coaching is self-care and connection. And when I say connection, I talk about connection to yourself, but also connection to other women. So I really leverage the the strength of bringing women together in circles, and the circle is called Bindi Parlor. And I bring them together, and it's such a beautiful medicine for what women need, because then they start to trust each other. And what I typically do when I do Bindi Parlor is I'll pick a theme that we'll work around. And one of the themes that's been really openly received by women is around the theme of self-compassion, which also ties in nicely to self-awareness. So when I actually bring women together and we spend 2 hours on self-compassion, and I really also reference Dr. Kristen Neff's work on self-compassion, and she has this entire book on it, and have them do an assessment and then share the struggles. It's so therapeutic and cathartic to watch women actually recognize that I am struggling, and I am not actually being nice to myself. And it's really, they didn't really recognize that until that moment. And then to have others then support them, it's so beautiful for me to witness. And that's why I love doing the women's circle. So I think so to recap, just bringing women together is such in itself such a powerful way of helping others recognize that preventative healthcare is really important, and preventative mental health. Like for me, mental health is huge.
Oh, it's beautiful. And I love this idea of just first starting by gathering and bringing people together, and how that tribe, that community is something that so many of us had for so much of our evolution, and many of us don't have it now in day-to-day life.
Yeah, especially with, technology, and just like you've probably heard, Amelia, is that although technology is bringing people together, it's also creating quite a bit of disconnection too, because the in-person gatherings are not happening as often.
I always find too, it's such an obstacle as somebody who looks to create these type of communities for people. It's that I know so much that people want this and they want to connect. And then at the same time, it can be so difficult to actually get people to show up, even when people want to be able to do it. Even right now, we've got this beautiful retreat scheduled for our alumni of our program, and I know that so many people want to be there. It just feels like life is just always pushing and pulling on people's time, and I know that for me, I'm always like, I have to prioritize people. Put people first, kind of a thing, and it can be so hard because that technology and the doing and the running around could be so tempting, and there's just so many options on a day-to-day. Like even before we started this, you and I were talking about the FOMO that we have around just wanting to be in so many places at once. So I could imagine that it took some time to get to the place where you're actually having women frequently show up for these gatherings.
It is. And, I had to do actually, I had a few insights that came along the way, because this is my side hustle, right? Like doing the women's circles and stuff, and I still work full-time as an OT. And I realized that I was doing it all wrong. I got so caught up in social media, email marketing, like all these, if you go down this rabbit hole, and if you're a solopreneur to start with, it can really eat you up, and it actually takes you away from what's super important, which is really creating those connections. And I had to pause and stop and reflect and gain clarity, and I came to the realization that actually marketing it is not as important as the old school way of word of mouth. So starting small, starting local, and then eventually building your way up, and then making it a little bit, like bringing it up to a larger scale is the way to go. So starting small and slow, which is something I can also handle, is really the path that works for me, and it's the path that creates those connections. In Toronto, one of the beauty of Toronto is that it's so diverse culturally, and there's so many co-working spaces now. So that was the other thing, finding spots where people actually gather anyways, and making it convenient for them to then either gather in the middle of the day, or at the end of the day, or at the beginning of the day. It just helps cut down that extra barrier that they might face in terms of coming together. So in Toronto itself, we have a few women's co-working spaces, which is what I've used in the past to bring women together. And place is also aesthetically really designed for feminine connection, so that helps.
That's beautiful, Dimple. And I appreciate that so much because I think people listening that are out there working to build their own thing. I mean, I know I'm constantly needing to repeat these words to myself in my own business where it's like, stay in my lane, stay in my lane, stay in my lane, and my race, my pace, which is something that we got from one of our other capsters in terms of one of the themes of how she lives her life, because it's so easy to get caught up on, well, if you want to run a business, then you need to do this, and you should do online marketing, and you should do Facebook ads, and you should do all of this stuff. And if it's not what your intuition is guiding you to, if it's not what you love to do, and it's not necessarily the way every single person needs to scale whatever it is that they're doing. And so I feel like I'm constantly needing to filter through the weeds of all of the options of things that I have to do and just say, stay in my lane, do it the way that I know works for me. Might not work for everybody else, but this is what works for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's something I had to honor too. So I'm glad you're listening to that because the social comparison is a killer.
And I'm curious, what specific tools within positive psychology are ones that you have found the most helpful in your life?
Oh, yeah. So it's really interesting. When I started documenting my life in the form of blogging and through speaking, I've done a few speaking engagements, the characteristic that keeps coming up for me, savoring is a big part of my life. I think I just do that naturally. And, I have chats with my partner and he finds it interesting that I go often back into time, not to dwell in it, but I really savor these memories. And they really light up my day and create joy or happiness for me. And then the second thing is also gratitude. Like gratitude practice is a big part of my life. I try to instill these practices in my boys, obviously through modeling, but also through tactile practices. And one of the things we have in our home, which we've had for many years, is just in this vase, I have these twigs that are just from the outside that we gathered, and we've got colored cards that we write down our gratitudes every so often, and we stick them onto this tree, and it's a beautiful display of all the gratitudes that I and my kids have written over the years. Their dads come over and he's written, guests have come over and they've written. It's a beautiful, just a visual representation of the gratitudes. And I also obviously keep a gratitude journal. And then more recently, my partner and I, because we don't live together, we wake up every morning and express a gratitude towards each other that's super specific. So it's actually really helped to minimize any kinks too, right? Like in a relationship. So that's helped. So savoring, gratitude practice, and then resilience. Like I look at my boys, and one of the things, I come from an Indian culture, and one of the things that we're programmed to believe is that if your marriage falls apart, you don't get divorced, you don't get separated, you work on it because the kids might suffer. And I say the opposite. I say, well, if you stay in a bad marriage and the kids suffer, which is really the practice that a lot of the professionals, is the practice that they encourage you to build towards. And for me, just watching myself and my boys go through this adjustment, this change, which wasn't easy, just reminds me of the ability for us to fall and then to get up again. And from that, what I realized was, again, it kind of just came back full circle, was that really what was holding me back my entire life was shame. And from that, from that concept, I realized that actually a lot of women, and not just women in my culture, suffer from shame. And shame, Brene Brown does a great job of this. She's probably the only one that I know that does this so well, and talks about shame. And she's like, shame is lethal, shame is deadly, and shame thrives in silence. So if we don't talk about our stories of shame, it's going to hold us back from shining. That's sort of a term I coined. And I started to talk to women about developing shame resilience. So I think my training in positive psychology really helped me to develop these concepts. So, the concept of resilience, but also specifically the concept of shame resilience. which I'm still building on and doing some speaking around and really wanting to put that out there. It's a hard one for people to admit to their stories of shame, but that's really what we need more of, is for people to talk more about their shame stories with trusted individuals. And from that, you can, I talk about the 3 C's to developing shame resilience, which is compassion, self-compassion, connection to yourself, and then connections to others who you trust, and then courage are the 3 C's that I talk about when I talk about it in on stage about how to develop shame resilience. So yeah, I think that's like, out of all of the stuff that I've learned, like that's been a big one for me.
Wow. That is so full and profound that I actually want to like back up a little bit and see if we could pull that apart for our listeners, because you captured so much that is so fundamental to our sense of belonging and our sense of community, that when we experience something and we feel ashamed of it, we start to disconnect from ourselves and from others, right? We feel like something is wrong with us. We don't measure up, and how toxic and lethal, as you said, that could be. And you mentioned that in your journey, you were raised in a traditional Indian household, and then you courageously chose to get a divorce when your marriage wasn't working. Can you just tell us a little bit more about that process and what that was like?
Mm-hmm. So I shared this publicly too, and I co-authored a book. So my story's in a book called Women Rising Volume 3, and it's called So About That Affair is the title. And what had happened in my marriage was on so many levels, there was this shame, and the shame was around particularly that I'm one of 4 children, and my siblings have all had like a semi-arranged marriage. So they were introduced to their partner for the purpose of getting married, and that's how they got married. And I was the only one. I'm like the black sheep in my family, and I'm not even that bad. I went away to university. I picked my own partner, and we were super young, got married. I had 3 babies, and it just was a very bad marriage. I still love him dearly, but we can't be in partnership together as a couple. But as parents, we parent pretty well, and that also is another thing that, a topic for another day, but we really work hard at parenting our children well. And when I decided, so for 5 years, I suffered in silence. Like, I didn't talk to anybody about my marital issues because of shame, because I picked my own partner, and out of the 4 of us, how am I even going to be able to confess that, oh my God, this marriage is not falling apart? And that's a reflection on who I am as a person, of the choice that I've made. So that really held me back. And instead of reaching out for help, either by talking to people, by talking to girlfriends, or by going for counseling, I numb my pain. And so that's one of the consequences of not really addressing the pain, or really coming head on with your shame. Instead of reaching out because I was ashamed, I just numbed my pain, and I numbed it through having another relationship while I was in my marriage. And that's when I realized, when this relationship finally came to fruition, and it was ending, or not ending, sorry, it came to fruition, and I realized this is, I'm going down the wrong path, and I pretty much jumped from one fire to another, and I started seeking out help. And then I understood the importance of actually sharing my story of shame with other people, because once I started to do that, I started off with my sister, and then a girlfriend, and then finally a therapist, and then finally on a bigger level in terms of with other women, and then finally speaking about my shame story, so that others can actually gain some can gain some support in their own stories, and whatever that is. But that's the first step, is like listening to other people talk about their shame story. And that was the reason I did it. I was really nervous about sharing my story of shame, but I knew that if I wanted to break the silence, I'd have to speak about it, so that others can see that they're not in it alone. And actually, that's what happened. Many people came out and then spoke about their shame story. So that's really sort of the trajectory of the whole thing that led me to realize why it's so important for us to share stories of shame.
That's so beautiful, Dimple. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I remember when I first heard Brene Brown talk about that the antidote to shame is being heard and being witnessed and being seen. I remember this heavy lead imaginary coat that I felt like I was carrying around for so much of my life, just sort of melting off because it just seemed so simple. It was like, oh, that's it. That's all we have to do. If there are things that you've been carrying around for a really long time where that told you that you didn't measure up, that you're not good enough, all you have to do is just allow yourself to put them down. That makes so much sense because we all just want to be connected. We all just want to be seen. And that the times where I have transcended those things that I held on for a long time is when I had someone compassionately hear me and say, wow, that must have been really, really hard. And I'm here and I'm with you. And that we can't go back and undo the past, and you don't need this magic wand, nor are you doomed for the rest of your life to walk around with this stuff, that we can actually let some of that baggage go just by the power of connection. That's so beautiful.
And it's been awesome. Like, it's been such a big body of work that I want to continue to build on because it is big, and because not enough people are doing these stories of shame. So encouraging or actually inspiring people to speak about the stories of shame is really what I would love to see happen. But the whole thing around Bimini Pearl is also creating that sacred space, like you were saying, and just having someone witness and listen to you and hold space for you is important, because first they have to hold the space for you in order for you to trust them, and then you can release.
That's beautiful. And one of the things that we frequently ask our guests is whether or not you have a motto or words to live by that fuel how you show up in the world. And with all of your courage and all of your connection and all of your commitment, I'm curious, what are some of the mottos that carry you through?
Yeah, so beautiful question. If you had asked me this 5 years ago, I was like, I don't know. But we actually did an exercise in your class. I can't remember which module it was, where we had to come up with a life statement. And I don't have that in front of me, but what I did do with that is I went and got a tattoo on my arm as visual reminders of what my life's purpose is. And I have 3 words on there. And the words are love, grow, inspire. So for me, life's about loving deeply, growing, and expanding and inspiring others to do the same.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. Dimple, how can people find out more about you and more about your work?
Yes, so I do have a website. It's dimplemukherjee.com. And I'm really active on Instagram under Dimple_Mukherjee. That's how you can find me. So those are the 2 spots.
Beautiful. And Dimple, what's next for you? What next new and exciting things are you working on?
So, yeah, really quickly, I did a fun workshop last year around calling in your word for the year. And people really resonated with that. It started off as a party in my own home with my girlfriends between Christmas and New Year's 3 years ago. We gathered together and we set intentions and we picked a word of the year. And that practice has been such a beautiful practice, not only because it actually works to have a word for the year, but because the women that were brought together, and some of them didn't know each other, created such great connections that are still present today. And I would love to take that to a deeper level this year, and looking at perhaps offering that to organizations as a retreat for their staff, and also doing a bigger retreat this year. I had initially thought about doing an online program with an online version of it, so I'm still humming through that. But yeah, that's something that I really want to do, and it's fun, and it brings people together. And my word of the year this year is flow. And so it's this constant primer in my mind about how can I invite more of that into my life. So that's like the next immediate thing that I'm working on.
That's awesome. I did a similar word practice, and my word for the year is excellence.
Oh, I love that.
I love this. The word just has been, and be careful what you wish for.
Yeah, that's right.
When you decide to commit to excellence for there, it's like, oh, I also just ask for a lot of work.
Exactly. Yeah, that's beautiful.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Dimple, for sharing yourself, your wisdom, your story, your words. Friends that are listening, do check her out. She is just doing so much soulful work from a deeply, deeply connected and committed place. And Dimple, I'm so grateful for your time today. Thank you.
Thank you, Amelia.
Thanks so much for listening. And as always, if there's an area of your life that needs hacking, or a research topic that you want more information about, let us know. Send us a message at info@theflourishingcenter.com. Also, are you curious about becoming a positive psychology practitioner yourself, or how you can help others integrating the science of well-being either as a coach, as a teacher, a speaker, a consultant, or integrating it into the work that you're already doing in the world? Well, learn more about our positive psychology certification programs. We have all new programs launching in September and October of 2018. Simply go to our website, www.theflourishingcenter.com, and learn about our upcoming practitioner trainings. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you next time.